Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So what have I got for you lovely people today? Well, we're going to take another trip to the Scottish Highlands and have a go at this little croft. And we're also going to have a go at using some of these acrylic inks. Great fun. So hang about to the end, because I've also got rather an amusing little story about when I demonstrated something similar to this several years ago in class. So come and join me and we'll paint this together. Okay, so for today's materials, my paper is some lovely Arche Rough 300 £. Any decent watercolour paper will do. My colours today, 3 primaries, cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow, then some cadmium orange, yellow ochre, Payne's grey, and over here some burnt umber. My brushes, my number 3 rigger, number 6 round, a mop, number 12 round, and a 3/4 inch flat. I'm also going to be using some acrylic inks today. This one is a Daler-Rowney Sepia, and these two Liquid-X. This is a yellow ochre, and this is a burnt umber. So this one isn't too difficult to draw, as everything is fairly straight and horizontal. The waterline and the roofs are all dead flat. But as always, the drawing template is available to download free of charge from my website, link in the description. Off we go. With my flat brush, I'm just painting around the croft with cleanish water, and then with a mop soaking the whole sky. Now let it absorb into the paper for at least a minute. Then, with a flat brush again, paint in a few strokes of cadmium orange. Now this is cobalt blue with just a touch of Payne's grey to darken it a little. And then I'm continuing down into the lake. Now this is Payne's grey for these darker clouds. And now back in with the blue mix, and this time I'm using my number 12 brush. Okay, so now I'm tilting my board at an angle of about 45 degrees and letting the paint run across diagonally. Still wet and wet, a few bands of blue into the water. Now, dry your brush and lift out this sheen in the water. And again, this must be done when it's still wet. Right, I've been asked by a few people about my paint to water ratios, and what I usually like to use is slightly more water to paint. So say it's about a 60 water, 40% paint, but it's all very much guesswork. Here you can see a good solid but still wet wash, and then just add in a little more water to reduce the value. More water again, and we have a nice pale tint. And I'm using that middle tint here to paint across both of these headlands. When it's dry, add another layer of that same wash to this nearer headland just to give that sense of distance. And then with that same wash into the lake and over here into the croft. Okay, so now with a darker value of that same colour, these trees will help to give a high contrast to the croft. Okay, so now we're going to tackle this foreground bank. So what I'm doing is pre-mixing up a muddy green made up of cobalt blue and cadmium yellow, a sandy colour with yellow ochre with just a touch of burnt umber, and then a dark brown mix made up of burnt umber and a touch of cobalt blue. Next, with my spray, I'm giving the bank area quite a good soaking without saturating it. And then I'm literally chucking in the premixes into the foreground. And again, tilting my board to let the paint run down diagonally. Sometimes I find you can't pre-plan this sort of painting and you just have to go with the flow. This is how I like to paint, when you're just on the edge of control. Sometimes it's good to let the paint just do its own thing, and it will reward you with happy accidents, things that you could never have anticipated. And this is why I find watercolour so rewarding. And here I'm just using the sharpened end of my brush to score in a few textures, and I just used a pencil sharpener and softened the edge with some sandpaper. And here just some table salt sprinkled in. So now I'm using some of this acrylic ink, and this is the De La Rowney Sepia, and I'm just squeezing it into the wet wash. And here I'm just dropping in a few clean water blobs to try and force a few back runs. Splatting in here some more dark tones. And this is the ink again, and I'm just making this up as I go along. Now some of the Liquitex yellow ochre. And again I'm picking up the board and just letting it run down. So now we need to let this totally dry. So it's a perfect time for a short break, and as it's still too early for alcohol, a glass of iron brew. Now, an interesting fact, Coca-Cola is the #1 selling soft drink in every country in the world except Scotland, where of course it's iron brew. So now it's dry, we can splat in some more texture, and this time we're going to get some nice hard edges. Now onto the Croft, and this is just some cadmium orange, just with a little bit of burnt umber dropped in. Now for a dirty dull green mixture, and this is just some cadmium yellow and cobalt blue with just a touch of Payne's grey added in. Some burnt umber here on the shore. And some Payne's grey for details on the Croft. Nice, quick and loose brush strokes, all done with my number 12. Softening now technique with a damp tissue. And this can work really well, especially if you rub really hard, you can really pick up the texture of the paper. Back with my brush again, and I've just decided to sweep this flat path area around in a bend towards us. Always be ready to adapt if you think you can improve upon a composition. And here just softening a few more of the hard edges with some tissue or kitchen paper. And now for the tree, and I'm using my number 6 brush and using a strong mix of Payne's Grey to put in the main trunk. And now with my rigger for these spindly branches and some further twiggy details. Okay, now I'm back with my number 6 brush and a very watery Payne's Grey mix, just to give the impression of some of these small twiggy details. Now, I hadn't thought about putting in a fence, but I think it's a good tool for helping to create that sense of distance. Just make sure that the posts get smaller towards the croft. And still with my number 6, some more fiddly little bits here on the croft. And then back into the water for a few more ripple effects. Okay, so now I'm re-wetting this bank area here because I wanted to try this burnt umber Liquitex ink. Now I had a practice earlier and got some really quite interesting effects. So dropping straight into the wet bank, and yeah, I quite like this. Nearly there, the magic scalpel, and just scratch out some glistening water on the lake. Now just simply scratch along the surface, taking out the coat of paint. You don't need to dig too hard into the paper. Now for a little bit of white pastel pencil. This now comes included in my 2 brush sets. And how about a few seagulls? And a few other little details. And now with my soft pastels, please see video link above for more details on what pastels I use. And these soft pastels are ideal for just picking up the texture of the paper and giving this little effect of bracken. So I think we're in danger of overworking it again, so we'll call it a day. Oh yes, it's the next morning review. And I just feel that this area in the sky is just a little bit empty, so I'm deciding to add in a few wispy clouds. So, respraying with clean water, flat brush and some Payne's Grey. And yes, I think it was worth it. We're all done. Okay, so now for a funny little story which I promised you. Now I was teaching watercolour at my local college evening classes, must have been maybe 20 years ago, and I had a chap who used to come along to my classes. His name was Angus, Scottish chap, lovely fellow, very, very quiet and unassuming, and he used to sit at the back. Anyway, we were painting a scene, probably quite similar to this, all quiet, when suddenly from the back of the class I heard, "I got a story about a croft." Everyone looks around and there's Angus, he's standing up. And I said, "Please go ahead and tell us." So this actually happened. He stood up and stood on one of the chairs and proceeded to tell the whole class a joke. Now, it's a joke which I've told many times and I can never do it justice because Angus had this really deadpan, beautiful Scottish accent, and he had the class in absolute hysterics, and I still giggle today when I think about it. So this is the little joke that he told us. Okay, there's this chap, he works in the city of London, and he's fed up of the rat race, so he decides to sell up and he moves to the most remotest place in Scotland, miles from nowhere. Anyway, he's been there a couple of years and he's thinking, you know, this isn't really what it's cracked up to be, you know. Anyway, one evening he's startled, there's a knock on his door, and he opens it up, and there filling the frame of the door is this big burly Scotsman, you know, kilt, ginger beard, the lot. And he says, "I'm inviting you to a party." Chap says, "Oh, that's fantastic." He says, "To be honest, I've been really lonely." He says, "Aye, but I better warn ye, there'll be a lot of drinking."
No problem, he says. Back in the wine bars, I could tuck it away. I'll be fine. Aye, but I better warn ye, he says, there'll be a lot of feasting. No problem, he says. I've been living on turnips for 2 years. Fantastic. Aye, but I better warn ye, there might be a bit of fisticuffs. He says, no problem. I used to play rugby. You know, I can handle myself. Aye, but I better warn ye, there might be a bit of hanky-panky. Fantastic, he said. Who's going to be there? Just be the two of us. Anyway, on that note, thanks everyone for watching. Please don't forget to do all the normals. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again next week. So take care everyone. Bye for now.